3 guided missile destroyers, more than 2,000 Marines, a submarine, and multiple aircraft. That's just some of what the United States has deployed to the Caribbean in recent days to deal with the Maduro regime in Venezuela. Now, official U.S. sources are referring to this as a strictly counter-narcotics operation, but it has raised concerns about the possibility of a military confrontation. I mean, a Venezuelan opposition leader that we'll hear from in today's video is talking about how great it would be for the U.S. to topple a few regimes in the region. And Russian media is actually floating the idea of sending long-range strike drones to Caracas so they could strike U.S. military bases in the region. So let's get into what we know so far. Starting out with some reporting here from Eric Schmidt at the New York Times, who said, quote, U.S. officials said that up to 3 guided missile destroyers would soon arrive in the region. The naval warships will target boats operated by drug cartels transporting fentanyl to the United States. They have not yet said how they will do so. Also headed to the region is the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group, including the USS San Antonio, the USS Iwo Jima, and the USS Fort Lauderdale, carrying 4,500 sailors, and the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit with 2,200 Marines. These ships and the Marines departed Norfolk, Virginia earlier this week, but had to turn around to avoid Hurricane Aaron. They are expected to head back out soon and are likely to arrive in the next several days, and this reporting itself was a couple days ago. They say several P-8 surveillance planes and a submarine are also deploying to the region. Now, a couple key notes there. Counter-narcotics operations are something that our Marines and our Navy can do. They are capable of doing this sort of stuff. We have a very flexible military. Our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are very capable of doing a wide range of tasks. That doesn't mean that it is primarily what they're trained in. Generally speaking, counter-narcotics would typically fall under something like the Coast Guard, especially dealing in the southern border area like that. I would expect they have some additional training and some resources available to be able to carry out this rather unique type of operation. Again, fully capable, not necessarily their primary mission set historically. Now, Ian Ellis, an excellent source over on X, I'm going to link his profile in the description below, has been putting together a lot of really valuable imagery and overlays to show where a lot of these assets are. He said the 3 destroyers will reportedly arrive off the coast of Venezuela within 24 hours, and this was published yesterday. He says the USS Gravely and USS Jason Dunham left Mayport last week. The USS Sampson is near the Panama Canal. Littoral combat ship USS Minneapolis-St. Paul is already on station and in the vicinity of Curacao. The Iwo Jima got underway again today and departed Norfolk for a deployment to Southcom. This was as of yesterday. And the New York Times reported that a major buildup of U.S. naval forces is underway, with up to 3 destroyers headed to the territorial zone outside of Venezuelan waters. Now, real quick, we have to talk about why Venezuela in the first place, which has long been a focus of U.S. foreign policy in terms of frustration with Nicolas Maduro. We currently, the United States and many other countries around the world, view Maduro as an illegitimate leader right now, saying that the most recent round of elections were not genuine. They were not upheld correctly, and Maduro is not the one that should actually be in power. Now, the Associated Press says that this is all part of President Trump's efforts to combat threats from Latin American drug cartels. They quote a Defense Department official confirming that the military assets have been assigned to the region in support of counter-narcotics efforts. That is the primary reason, according to the DoD, the White House, and the U.S. government, that our military forces are being sent south. This comes following about a week ago where the United States doubled its reward for information leading to the arrest of Venezuelan President Maduro, raising it to $50 million and framing Maduro as a key figure in narco-trafficking networks. The naval deployment serves as both an operational move and a strategic signal, demonstrating unwavering pressure on Maduro's regime amid a broader crackdown on narco-terrorism. And there's a couple key components there that this could just be a signal, a show of strength, a show of force here in the Western Hemisphere. Entirely possible that this is designed to get Maduro to act a certain way. It could also be viewed as a way to maybe give some strength or some credibility to maybe opposition figures inside of Venezuela, giving the idea or the confidence to maybe stand up and try to take back the country from Maduro. And last but certainly not least is the possibility that there is some sort of direct military confrontation with Venezuela. Look, Marines are Marines, don't want to mess with any of them. At baseline, 2,000 Marines is not necessarily what you'd use to invade a country, so I think that's a bit premature to talk about. Airstrikes or missile strikes carried out by the Navy does not seem like it's in the cards right now. That also seems like a pretty drastic step, but this is a lot of military power being moved into the region. Now, looking at a couple statements here, we've not gotten a lot from the United States. By and large, our officials have been pretty consistent with just Maduro is a criminal, he's an illegitimate president. We did get something to kind of frame the U.S. perspective from the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt a couple days ago, essentially saying, all cards are on the table. We will do what is needed to stop the flow of drugs into the country. Here we go.
The 3 U.S. warships that are being sent to Venezuela, and there's 4,000 Marines on board. Are you looking at possibility of boots on the ground there?
What I will say with respect to Venezuela, President Trump has been very clear and consistent. He's prepared to use every element of American power to stop drugs from flooding into our country and to bring those responsible to justice. The Maduro regime is not the legitimate government of Venezuela. It is a narco-terror cartel. In Maduro, it is the view of this administration, is not a legitimate president. He is a fugitive head of this cartel who has been indicted in the United States for trafficking drugs into the country. And with that,
so this is really early enough to where there's what I would say are legitimate voices in every direction saying this is simply about drugs, end of story, all the way over to this is setting the stage for full-blown military force and the toppling of governments in the region. And that's not just some random U.S. analysis. That's actually coming from the opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, in Venezuela, talking on Fox News just yesterday. And she did a number of interviews in recent days talking about how, hey, we are en route here. We have the possibility of turning Venezuela into a strong U.S. ally, an energy ally, a security ally. And this would be the first step. With the fall of Maduro, then comes the fall of Cuba, the fall of Nicaragua. And you hear the host at the end say, this could be one of President Trump's greatest accomplishments, which seems very different than stopping the flow of drugs. So again, we're hearing very different explanations as to why the troops are moving south. U.S. government's been very consistent. I should mention that. But let's listen to opposition leader Machado here talk about why she would like to see the United States involved. Let's give it a listen.
They just realized that President Trump is not joking. This is very serious. I mean, this is dismantling a criminal structure that uses Venezuela, as we have said before, yes, to channel tons of drugs that finally reach the United States. And we will turn Venezuela from the criminal hub of the Americas into the energy hub of the Americas, the strongest ally in security, in trade, in energy that the U.S. will ever have in Latin America. This will be huge in terms of the legacy, because once Maduro is out, the Cuban regime will fall as well, and Nicaragua will be free as well. And for the first time in history, we will have the Americas free of communism and dictatorship.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think if President Trump cleans up the Western Hemisphere, we had a senator from Mexico saying they're unhappy over there with the narco state that they're living under. If we can get rid of the cartels and the Chinese, I think this will be President Trump's greatest foreign policy victory. So Maria Corina Machado, the bravest woman in Latin America, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's an honor.
And we are starting to see some of that framing come from Venezuela specifically. Again, of course, not from the Maduro regime, but sticking with Machado here in another interview where she talks about how, hey, it's not just that Maduro is bad or a narco trafficker. This is where the enemies of the Western Hemisphere are coalescing, like really speaking to Venezuela being a major, major adversary for the United States. Here we go.
Finally, we're seeing the right approach with courage and clarity towards and criminal enterprise that has taken over our country, our land, our resources, our institutions, destroying Venezuela, bringing misery to our people, and destabilizing the region in order to harm the United States of America. Venezuela has been turned into a safe haven of all criminal networks and the enemies of the Western Hemisphere.
Now, of course, we are hearing things from Venezuela and their allies right now, namely Russia. To start out here, Maduro put out a statement just a couple of days ago talking about the United States, quote, "The empire has gone mad and has renewed its threats to Venezuela's peace and tranquility. And as a part of that, has called for civilian militias to increase their numbers, for volunteers across the country to take up arms, citing the possibility of a U.S. invasion. This here is reported by France 24, where they say civil servants, housewives, and retirees alike lined up in Venezuela's capital on Saturday as thousands volunteered to join the country's militia in case there is a U.S. invasion. President Maduro called on citizens to respond to the current U.S. threat and sign up over the weekend to the Bolivarian militia, a civilian corps linked to the South American country's armed forces. It's not clear how many are in that militia at this point. Maduro has said recently that they have 4.5 million under arms, but the most recent estimate put together by the International Institute for Strategic Studies 5 years ago, back in 2020, said it was around 343,000. So probably less than Maduro's 4.5 million, but if that previous figure was in the 300,000s and they're getting a surge of recruitment right now, not crazy to think it could be higher than that number. They said people in the crowd were chanting, quote, "I sign up for Venezuela, long live the homeland." And they had multiple pictures of people, young and old, signing up under the genuine belief that the United States is preparing to invade and occupy Venezuela. Now, looking into Venezuela's allies, Maduro did put out a statement recently where he suggested that he has been in regular communication with President Xi of China, so kind of keeping China aware of all of the developments around the U.S. deployment. Again, we don't know the extent of those conversations. At the very least, probably just trying to keep the U.S. on our toes, that line of communication is open. Russia has been a little more vocal. Foreign Minister Lavrov, this is according to TASS, expressed solidarity with the Venezuelan leadership and reaffirmed comprehensive support to its efforts to protect national sovereignty and ensure institutional sustainability amid growing external pressure on Caracas. And then this is not an official Russian source, but it's a big Russian media organization called Rybar. They actually put out an assessment saying, hey, maybe Russia should just send a bunch of long-range strike drones to Venezuela. That would change the calculation because all of a sudden they'd be able to hit U.S. military bases in the region. Quoting Rybar here, they say, "The increase in U.S. military activity in the Caribbean raises the question, how could Venezuela respond in the event of a conflict? The answer may lie in Russia's recent UAV advancements. Imagine Venezuela receiving 2,000 Garand drones. With that number, Caracas could threaten U.S. bases across the Caribbean and potentially even targets on the continental U.S. under certain conditions." Oh, real quick, see if you can find all the errors in this Russian map. It's all over the place, but they've got a few things a little bit wrong with U.S. geography, to say the least. But in this Rybar assessment, they went out to list all of the locations that would possibly be in range. From Caracas specifically, the capital of Venezuela, they say that their drones would be able to strike Guantanamo Naval Base in Cuba, Fort Buchanan in Puerto Rico, an Air National Guard base in the Virgin Islands, and the Melgar Air Base in Colombia. And from western Venezuela or offshore barges, as in floating ships off into the Caribbean and slinging Russian drones towards the United States, they say they'd be able to hit the Homestead Air Reserve Base in Florida, the Soto Cano Air Base in Honduras, and another facility in the Bahamas. They say even though the United States has extensive experience intercepting Garands, thousands would require a significant increase in defensive assets. The threat to U.S. air bases would no longer be hypothetical. This may force Washington to reconsider the cost of military escalation in the region, especially amid naval overstretch due to global deployments in the Indo-Pacific and Middle East. Venezuela is a major buyer of Russian weapons. Supplying it with Garands seems like a logical step. Other countries might follow suit, seeking a cheap and long-range strike option. And if someone brings up, quote, complicating talks with the United States, they might want to first reflect on how many Russian soldiers and civilians have been killed by American weapons since 2022. That usually puts things into perspective. So Venezuela and their allies framing this by and large as aggressive U.S. military action, possibly turning into offensive military operations against Maduro and the country of Venezuela. The United States sticking with this being a counter-narcotics operation with the idea of stopping the flow of fentanyl across the Caribbean into the United States. And then we have the Venezuelan opposition leader kind of right in the middle, maybe is the way to put it, talking about how, hey, regime change would be good for the United States, for Central and South America, and be good for the people of Venezuela. So with more U.S. military assets heading south, this is going to be one to keep an eye on. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.